In 2017, I was here and asked Malcom Turnbull, as then Prime Minister, about constitutional recognition and what the process would be with that. And Scott Morrison clearly isn't on the panel, but I would like to ask the same question to him, but I guess this has to go to the panel. And that is, where are we going to go with the process of constitutional recognition? Should the Prime Minister be standing up and making a statement to us as a nation, and I mean the Prime Minister, saying what's actually going to happen and the sort of time frame that might happen in as well? Like, will this be during his term of government? And I share the frustration of how long this is taking.
Yes.
So.
OK, let's go to Julian, who's here, whether he likes it or not, representing the government.
I'm very pleased to represent the government on this question. So I think the first thing to say is when you're talking about changing the Constitution, we know how difficult that is. 44 times Australians have attempted to change the Constitution and only 8 times has it succeeded. To succeed, you need bipartisan support. On this particular question, you need broad support of the Indigenous communities, you need a majority of Australians voting, and you need also a majority of Australians voting in 4 out of 6 states for this to pass. At the election, the government adopted the recommendations that we had made at the Joint Select Committee, and that was that a process would start. Point 1 was that you get the co-design process working and get that done right, so we know what it is that we're talking about when we talk about the voice. Step 2, you then look at constitutional issues and other legislative issues. So we're looking at a package of things, but I know everybody's thinking about this in terms of...
They've jumped ahead of step 2, haven't they, Julian? And they said it's not going to go to step 2
well, no, they haven't
before you deal with step 1.
They've said what we're going to do is actually have step 2 separately from step 1. But still, the first thing we need to do is to get the voice designed properly, so we actually know what we're talking about. I think the voice, for many people, is still a vague concept. Then we need to look at what are we going to look to do in relation to constitutional recognition.
So, Julian, can I bring you to the core of that question was, should the Prime Minister get involved in this? Could Scott Morrison actually make this an opportunity to define his Prime Ministership in a very different way that people expect it might be defined, and actually take a hold of this issue and surprise everyone and drive it himself? Would you like to see him do that?
Well, the Constitution, Tony, belongs to everyone, and I think it's really important that everyone gets involved. I was heavily involved in the 1999 Republic referendum. I'm a strong constitutional monarchist. One of the things that sank that referendum was the fact that Malcom Turnbull and Paul Keating got very heavily involved in it, and there was a perception that they wanted to make it their republic. I think, as laudable as this is as an issue, I think it's very important that it's not seen to be owned by any particular person or any side of politics or any group. The Constitution is a document for all Australians.
But it would depend entirely on how a Prime Minister did this. He could take it as an opportunity to unify the country around this issue. And that's, I guess, what the questioner was asking. Is this a moment, a window has opened here? Should the Prime Minister take that opportunity?
Well, I think any political leader who says we will do this, given where we are in this process today, is asking for failure. I think what we need to do is continue the consultation process, which we've set out, which is bipartisan support from a bipartisan committee, and ensure that we get the detail.
Julian,
right.
I'm going to interrupt you because Michael wants to get back in. Go ahead.
2 things. I wonder, Tony, if I'll be back asking the same question to the next Prime Minister. I think it is a constitution, and who would lead this if not for our Prime Minister?
Julian.
Well, look, the Prime Minister's view is going to be very important on this, but I think it's important that he responds to the Australian people in relation to this as well, and that we actually take the time.
Can I ask you this? Should he respond by not suggesting that the voice is a third chamber? Because that's one thing that's coming from senior cabinet figures, and you saw Barnaby Joyce, not a senior cabinet figure anymore, recant his position on this once he thought about it, once people talked to him about it. I mean, have you had a chance to talk to the Prime Minister to bring him round to the idea that this is not a third chamber?
Look, I've talked to the Prime Minister about this issue on several occasions.
Does he get it?
Look, I think he does get it. I think he's interested in it. I think the fact is, Tony, a couple of years ago, there was a real question as to whether this process would proceed at all. And we should celebrate the fact that we've got a commitment to constitutional recognition. We've got it, and that's a bipartisan commitment. We've got a commitment to the voice, and that's a bipartisan commitment. And we've got a commitment to co-design. That's where we are today. I know it's not as far as some people would like, but I think we need to let the process run its course. Because I think that's the best way to get an outcome.
Sally, can I hear you on this? And I should hear Jacinta.
I mean, I think what Michael was saying is the fact that the Prime Minister needs to, A, come up and say, well, the third chamber is actually a lie. It's not about that. And also the fact that there's 2 Supreme Justice courts have, you know, lawyers have come out and said, judges have come out and said, no, the law is fine. It goes back to what I said. The law is not the problem. Politics is the problem. So if the Prime Minister came out and said, look, you know, I think I support the Uluru Statement, or I think we need to work on the Uluru Statement together, he needs to make some sort of statement regarding this. Because that's the question, is what is he going to say? What do we want to hear from our Prime Minister? But also, it was given to the Australian people. And what we as Australian people have to do is go to our local leaders, our local representatives, and say, this is what I want. This is what I want from my community, and lobby from that angle, because we have the power. This is what we're forgetting. As Australians, we have the power. The politicians are in there because we have voted them in, but we sit with that power. So really, we need to be pushing that.
Now, Jacinta, you stood for a seat for the Liberal Party. I presume you're still a member of the Liberal Party. If the Prime Minister were to take the lead on this issue and suggest that the voice is not a third chamber, would you get behind it?
Well, I think we don't know what it is at this stage. So you can't even say it's not going to be a third chamber or it is going to be a third chamber. We don't simply know. But we don't know what it is. We simply don't know what it is. It's just a concept. That's what it is. And I think the Prime Minister is more concerned with the more significant issues. They're trying to tackle things like youth suicide.
To wait and see what it is before we decide that it's going to be something.
We probably should have put this program off and waited till we knew what it was before we started talking about it. No, look, I think he's more concerned with issues like, you know, suicide. I mean, my frustrations are with the fact that levels of violence haven't dropped in remote communities. That's where my frustrations are. You know, I can put aside the idea of a referendum as long as we start dealing with these issues that are actually going on in communities. The way I see it, it's like another issue that gets pulled, you know, gets pulled to the forefront that distracts us from what's really going on. And yeah, that's how I see it.
Well, it hasn't distracted me, because we're working very hard to close the gap and to ensure that Aboriginal voices are at the table in negotiations with government as equals. Negotiations, not consultations, not government business as usual. Taking on board Aboriginal-led solutions from our lived experience and our expertise, and making sure that we make a real difference in the quality of life to our people over the next 10 years. So we're waiting for no one. We're getting on with the job.
OK. Thank you. You're watching...